You are listening to Pause. We pause for a second or two. This is episode 70. First wave of emotion. Pausing is often difficult. Pausing is most of the times difficult. If we pause regularly, it becomes easier. But pausing always has built into it some degree of difficulty. When we pause, things stand out to us all the more clearly. When we pause, we see things that are not as apparent as when we are running. When we pause, a lot of energy is still going in the direction we were going. And it is difficult to pause for that reason. Today's episode is called First Wave of Emotion. And today we will talk about the nature of the difficulty in pausing, why it is so difficult. We will also speak about how the difficulty is sort of physically and in a mere physics standpoint, from a physics standpoint, how the difficulty looks. We will use a metaphor to understand this better. So we just imagine that we are holding a tennis ball in our hand. And we just drop the ball down onto the ground from where we're standing. And the ball will fall to the ground, and then it will bounce up quite high. And then the ball will turn mid-air and go back down. and then bounce up a second time. But this second time it just bounces up some distance from the ground, and then it turns in the air and goes down again, and then it bounces up only a short distance from the ground, and then the frequency of the bouncing gets even more frequent, and then the ball stops. Pausing is just like this. So whenever we find ourselves in a situation when it would be helpful to pause, then just as we pause, those first seconds when we paused, sometimes it's just right after we pause, the same second, and sometimes it can be, I don't know, a minute or two. But after that initial decision is made on our part to pause, then we will be struck by this first wave of emotion. And this first wave of emotion is like the tennis ball. When it bounces up the first time, it bounces up quite high. So the first wave of emotion after we have paused will always be severe if we are pausing in a difficult situation. And the more difficult a situation is, the more severe this first wave of emotion will be inside of us. This first wave of emotion, the difficulty in it, the severity of it, this first wave is the reason why we do not pause so often. The severity of this first wave of emotion is the reason why people panic and why stress and panic replicates and spreads so quickly. Not many people practices pausing regularly. It's just not that common. However, for those of us who see the potential benefit of pausing, for those of us knowing about this, knowing about the first wave of emotion, expecting the first wave of emotion, and developing this sort of craftsmanship and sense of predictability in the face of pausing. For those of us, this knowledge is very much needed. if we know what to expect emotionally from pausing, then pausing will not feel as frightening. Pausing will not feel as unknown. Pausing will not feel as blind. And there is much to be won by just noticing this first wave of emotion as it strikes us. So, as you listen to me in this podcast, chances are high that in the initial seconds of each episode, you will experience something similar to the first wave of emotion. You might have noticed, or of course you have noticed, that I start out every episode exactly the same. I say, you are listening to pause. We pause for a second or two. And then I say, this is episode something something. And you might have noticed that I say these first two sentences in almost the same way every time. The same melody and the same sort of rhythm to it. And by doing this, you will feel this sort of predictability from listening to me. And there's not that much to it. It's just that when we pause, pausing is difficult as it is. It's just hard to do. The first wave of emotion that comes from pausing is not easy to conquer. But knowing that I will say the exact same words in the exact same way at the beginning of each episode makes pausing easier. Not just for you, for me as well. And also the jingle, the song in the beginning of each episode, is also the same. So there's about 40 seconds of this music, and then I say these two lines, and then probably 50 seconds or so have passed. And these 50 seconds has already helped us deal with most of this first wave of emotion. And then it will be easier to just keep pausing. And this is the case for every difficult situation. This is the case for every time we pause. It's always these first seconds, this first minute. Sometimes it can be a bit prolonged, something like 5 or 10 minutes, depending on the situation. But the tricky part is always to get past this first wave of emotion. If we just can make it through the first wave, then the second and the third and the fourth wave of emotion will not feel as difficult at all. And that's also why I say we pause for a second or two. That pausing just feels different the first second from the second and on. It's always the hardest, the first second. We know what to expect from pausing because we make a craft out of it. We think about it, we talk about it. And it's always that first bounce of the tennis ball that is the most difficult. I want to spend this last part of today's episode talking a bit about what to expect from this first wave of emotion. What does it look like? The first wave of emotion has different sides to it. It has in main part, it has this physical side to it. It is very difficult, almost impossible, to pause if we do not wish to be physical. This first wave of emotion feels physically uncomfortable, sometimes physically unbearable. It just feels uncomfortable, and it can feel like this sort of panicky feeling. It can feel like a general panicky feeling all throughout the body, like on a cellular level almost. It can feel like the muscles want to tense. It can feel like we want to run away. It can feel like we want to frown. It can feel like we want to hit something. It can feel like we want to shout or scream at someone. It can feel like a burning sensation. It can feel like anxiety in the chest. It can feel like stomach ache. It can feel like headache. It can feel like this very dangerous depression that we will never come back from. It can feel like all of these. Very physical, very tangible, and quite frankly, it can feel terrifying. If we have chosen a really difficult situation, a real pickle, it will feel most definitely terrifying. And it's up to your level of competitiveness, how difficult a situation you wish to pause in. The more difficult situation, the more terrifying the first wave of emotion will feel on a sheer physical level. And then we have the thinking, the first wave of emotion. When we pause, we think catastrophic thoughts, very black and white thinking, very desperate thinking. We can think about death or pain or trauma, just really bad thoughts, really difficult thoughts, snowballing, and just not helpful thoughts at all. And these are very difficult to just move past. There is good reason for why it's so difficult to pause and why not more people do it regularly. The thoughts that come when we pause, they are very unpleasant sometimes. They can feel life-threatening, these thoughts. Pausing is no joke. Pausing is an ambitious craft to develop. And then pausing just simply comes with memories. If we pause in a difficult situation, the first wave of emotion also consists of memories, images, and episodes. We remember unpleasant memories. We associate the current situation to other situations that were unpleasant or that went wrong. And all of this, the physical, terrifying feeling, and the very catastrophic thoughts, and the bad memories, all of this is part of the first wave of emotion when pausing. And if we want to get good at pausing, if we want the benefits from pausing, we need to practice moving past this first wave of emotion. And I'm sorry to say, but it comes down to practice and practice and practice and practice. Doing it over and over and over and over again, daily. Doing it as often as we want. It comes down to how badly you want it. How badly do you want to get good at pausing? Yeah, that's it. So now we know a bit about what to expect from pausing. We have talked about the first wave of emotion. And knowing about it, it's good. And when we know that we should expect the first wave of emotion, it gets easier after that. If you make it past the first wave of emotion, then you've done more than half the job. More than half. That's it for today. Thank you.